I suppose, similar to both Kat and Bev, really. I feel like a lot of what I do is trying to make the point that, like, we've kind of always been here and we deserve to take up the spaces that we're in, and whether those spaces are considered majority white, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be present in them. And for example, yeah, similarly to Bev, playing in punk scenes, knowing that those genres have their origins in specifically Black music, it feels right that we should be taking up space in those scenes and genres that kind of come from us anyway.
Very good. I think you've all kind of touched on kind of different points just there. Before I forget, I will also say that for those watching, if you want to send in questions, you can do so. If you go to menti.com, so that's menti.com, and type in the code 8021613. So 8021613. You will be able to submit questions for our Q&A section. Right, so Beverly, I think it was you who kind of talked about representation. So I think, so one question is kind of for everyone, where do you think we need representation the most in terms of Black women?
The most, I think, just needs to be everywhere, to be honest. It should, you know how like there's just a standard, you know how like they try to make the Brits the standard, or like the Oscars is meant to be the standard, that's the standard, but it's not really. It's a standard for a certain type of person, and you never see our faces there, hence why we always have to make our own thing, our own genre of R&B, or, you know, rock. Like, we have to make our own genre. So if there is going to be a standard, make there be a standard, you know, and you see a mix of all different faces and all backgrounds and sexualities, everything. So, you know, yeah, I feel like representation has to just be everywhere. There's no like, oh well, we've done really good over here, but over here is a little bit dodgy. I think it's all over, really, that the standard isn't met, and hence why these conversations still have to happen time and time again, which is sad, because, you know, we are all tired pretty much of having to say the same thing time and time again. But
yes, I agree with Bev. I think that as somebody in the art world, when I was younger, because I grew up on an island, so when I was younger, there wasn't anyone who was Black and female who was a jeweler. There wasn't anyone who was Black and female who was a curator. And this kind of came full circle for me last year when I did my undergrad. I went on to new designers, and I think that representation is so important, because a perfect example of this was a little girl kind of came up. She was in a school group, and she came up to me and she said, you know, did you make this? And I said, yeah. And she goes like, did you really make this? And I'm like, yeah, I can show you some burns, you know. But what got to me was I kind of showed her jewelry from not only myself, but from other people in my class. And to my everlasting surprise, she came back. That was like the Tuesday, and she came back on the Saturday, and with her entire family in tow, which was a little bit scary, because I was like, oh, like, what have I done? But it turned out to be a good thing, because what she'd done was she went home and she basically said, you know, Mommy, I met this Black woman and she makes jewelry, and she had curated this entire thing. And like, you know, this was the first person that looked like me that was doing something that I was interested in. And so then I had the entire family on the Saturday basically saying, her mom's basically saying, thank you so much, because, you know, she was looking for someone and she couldn't find anybody, and now she's found you, which puts its own set of pressure on you. But on the other hand, you're representing. And I think that no matter what genre, we need representation. And I agree with what Bev is saying, because there's certain, there's certain places that they say, yes, this is for us, but it's really not. And this is, especially in today's world of divisive politics, it's very apparent that there's definitely not enough representation anywhere.
Yeah, I think if we were looking at the arts in particular, I do think representation is like super important for obviously like inspiring other people to feel like that's a space that they can enter. Like often you really need like role models who look like you to feel like, oh, that is something I could actually do. Like what you said about not having that example of female jewelers, for example, Black women jewelers, where you grew up. And I also think, particularly in the arts in this country, like the way that power is still held in the hands predominantly of cis white men in most cultural institutions needs to change. I mean, I guess in London we have the example of the strikes at the Tate, because the people who were being let go were more people of color, working class people. Those people were considered expendable, but the people still making the big bucks at the top still kept their jobs, even in a time such as this. So yeah, I think it kind of has to be like almost like a structural overhaul, as well as yeah, like representation, because sometimes it's felt like we've had, like Gowden takeovers at like art institutions, but then the institution still hasn't changed. So I'm quite interested in that as well, I think.
I suppose coming off of that, I think that's probably quite a good example of kind of, I think the best word for it is kind of tokenization. So this idea that, oh, look, we've got a Black woman, we're fine. Do any of you have, experiences with being tokenized for being a Black woman?
I haven't had that, but I know that a fashion show happened not too long ago, and the representation was on point. It was so amazing. And then the team took a selfie, the team behind like putting the show together, and the team was majority like white. Like there was actually it was all white actually. And people were just like, that's great that you're really diverse and you've got us at the foot, like, showing off your items, but your team, it's like, it's important for everything to be mixed. It's not okay to be like, oh, well, we'll show that we're, diverse and representation, but the people behind the scenes are not at all. Like the people doing the show, putting it together, it's important that it's diverse in all areas. You can't just be showcasing us and then not really putting us in places of power either. That's not great. It needs to be, in all sectors.
I also think it starts in education. And I'm going to say that because, as I said, I spent a total of 5 years at Glasgow School of Art. In both scenarios, I was the only Black woman or Black person even. So I spent 4 years in undergrad in jewelry design and silversmithing. And I kind of think, as I look back, that I was just like some sort of experiment. It was like, okay, let's get one of them in and see if she can actually deal with the entire program. Because for the 4 years I was there, you would watch every year people applying to be in the program, and you would watch them come in through the doors, and you watch them go up the stairs. And every time a door opened in this particular period of time, I would think, come on, and it would never be. So for 4 years, I was the only person there. I then went on to do my master's. And again, in that class, I was the only Black person. And I was like, okay, is this another experiment? Like, why is there not? And then you're told, oh, well, Black people don't apply, which is bullshit. Of course they apply. And I think that I sometimes wonder when you're doing, because, you get a call before, especially in today's world where you're doing a lot of things through Zoom. And I think that honestly, for the 4 years, I generally I know I was good, but honestly, I have no idea how. I think my name just messed them up or something. And so it was then like, oh, right, okay, we're gonna have a little experiment here and see if she can do it. And so it's tokenism in that way. And then whenever anything happened, you're then trying to pitch ideas to make a piece, or you're trying to pitch ideas to do a project. And I'm talking about, you know, something as simple as making a chain, and you're then having to explain yourself for what seems like hours and hours, because, you know, the staff are all white, so they don't understand where I'm coming from, or they don't understand what I'm trying to do, or, you know, all these different things. And so you do feel very much like, okay, I am just a token Black person, so that they can kind of tick a box and say, yep, we've got one of them, it's fine.
Well, yeah, so I play in a Black feminist punk band called Big Joni, and I don't know if we've experienced like specific tokenization, like I suspected it before, when we had a booking that came through kind of at the end of the summer, so kind of after the protests and like the music industry blackout and things like that. And it was just like a booking request that didn't really make sense, like where we would be positioned on the bill, who the other bands were, didn't really fit with us, made no sense, and we would have been the only Black people on the bill. And it felt a bit like, oh, he just asked because now in 2020 it's going to look quite bad if you book an all-dayer and there's no Black people and we're the Black band that you've heard of. So it's annoying to experience things like that, whereas we've had other bands, for example like Idols, who've booked us because we're a post-punk band, not just like to tokenize us, and they've been very explicit about that. And I think you can kind of sense the difference. So, but then it's hard to like doubt yourself as well and be like, well, is it that or is it not? So
I do get that. I mean, I've definitely had experiences kind of similar where I've been in a situation and I've gone, okay, did this happen just because of my name or the color of my skin, or, you know, did they look at me and my mum and go, you know, I've been applying for jobs recently, and I had a huge discussion with my parents where I said, you know, would I have gotten this job if I'd put my middle name down instead of my actual name? Would Catherine have gotten the job, but Matta didn't? And I think it's obviously it's things like that are difficult because we can never really know. But the fact that we have to think like that in the first place shows that something's wrong. I think kind of coming from that, obviously we've all kind of grown up as Black women. Was there any, like, was there a specific point when you kind of realized that you were Black and that meant something to society?
well, I think I first kind of came into contact with Black feminism like when I was 18 and kind of just going to uni, and so I'd like joined Twitter, and it seemed like there were a lot of like kind of prominent Black feminists on that platform, like kind of discussing the theories, and I hadn't come into contact with them before, and I'd only had like probably a rudimentary understanding of feminism before that. And it wasn't until I went to uni and the library had like books by like bell hooks and Audre Lorde and stuff that I then like came into contact with those texts, and then kind of had like the terminology to describe things that I'd maybe already experienced but hadn't known there was a word for, like intersectionality, things like that. So yeah, it wasn't so much like a significant point where something pivotal happened, but I guess because I grew up in Northwest London as well, so I was in quite a diverse area, and it wasn't actually until I went to university that I was in a city that was majority white. And even then, it wasn't until my second year that I lived off campus that I really started to understand what that meant in this country and really feel like the kind of differences of the way and like microaggressions, and then understand even that term or have that term to hand to use to describe what I was experiencing.
You were very lucky. As I said, I grew up on an island, and so I think I was about 5, and I suddenly realized that being Black and having an afro was a big production. And literally there was, Barbados is very tourist oriented. And obviously we have tourists that come into the island, we have tourists that come on ships, and this was one of the cases where I happened to be in town with my grandmother, and my afro was massive, it was bigger than me. And this tourist kind of came off. She was clearly from one of the boats, and this image was forever burned in my brain. I think I will be on my deathbed and I'll still be talking about this, but she decided that after eating pineapple or whatever, as I was walking down the road with my grandmother, that it was in her right, as almost I was part of her ticket to come over and basically push her hands into my hair. And I was trying to kind of escape from her, behind my grandmother. I'm like, who's this random strange person? Why is she touching me? What's going on? And my grandmother's literally trying to be super polite and saying to her, like, please remove your hands off the child's head. And this woman was literally calling over to her friends, like if I was some sort of interesting, I don't know, object with, my hair was completely separate to the rest of me. I had no feelings. And she took it as if, well, I've paid a ticket, I'm on the island, so this is part of my fun. She called her friends over to try to feel my hair, and they were like, oh my God, it feels like wool, it feels like this, it feels like that. And I just remember bursting into tears. And my grandmother got quite fierce and, determined and got me away. And so, yeah, and I remember saying to Grammy, like, am I ugly? Like, why are they touching me? And, you start going through all of that. And then that kind of went, and then a little bit, I've traveled quite a lot, and I remember being in Hong Kong, and all these tiny little Chinese ladies came over and started rubbing my skin, and I started laughing because I was like, it doesn't come off. It's not like something I paint on every morning. It's pretty much on there. And yeah, so I think that in traversing the world, I suddenly realized, oh, okay, yeah, like, and then I would have certain people saying, well, you're not very dark, so are you really Black? Like, what do you mix with? And, things like that. So these microaggressions, so you're then trying to figure out how to answer them without necessarily being particularly rude. So yeah, I learned from a very young age that being Black you were gonna have to open your mouth and stand up for yourself.
Yeah, it seems like it's universal, because you said that you obviously went to Japan as well, and then this person come off a boat who's obviously from maybe Europe or something. So it's like a universal thing, and obviously it's evident with all the protests all around the globe, that this is like a massive problem. But yeah, I think I must have been in about year 6 or something, so I might have been about 10 or 11 when like I first was hit with the reality that I'm different. I don't know what happened, but I was always quite cheeky as well. And, so I think I must have said something to a boy, and he was like, his comeback was, oh yeah, well, at least I'm not Black, or something like that. So then that hit me. And I remember everyone like at the table at that time kind of just went quiet as well, and knew that was like kind of below the belt. And that was the moment that it kind of hit me that, okay, I'm different, and it's not a good thing at all. So, but apart from that, oddly, nothing, because my mum, she didn't want me to be in spaces where I didn't feel like I could open my mouth, I couldn't be a part of. So from a young age, she used to always take us on holiday to like Cornwall, Devon, to these kind of places which don't have many Black people at all, but she always encouraged us to be in these spaces, these places, and not feel afraid to open our mouths or be like, get on, because you know, most people in general just want to get on and, you know, be nice. So I never really faced anything horrible in those places. I used to make a lot of friends and things like that with people outside my race. So from that, even though I knew I was different and that guy, you know, that boy said something to me, my mum always instilled in us to go out and always do whatever you wanted. Hence why I think, oddly, I wanted to play the drums out of all things and be in a place that obviously wasn't represented, but I never saw it like that. At that time, I never saw, oh, I'm not represented, so I can't be in that space. It's like, I'm not represented, it doesn't matter, they'll accept me either way. So that I'm quite lucky for that. My parents kind of instilled that in me. But yes, I always, like, you know, I always knew I was different. My mum from day dot would always say, like, you have to remember, she would always go, you've got this, so you've got to work 10 times harder. So that's always instilled in it within my household as well, as much as we had this, but her actions of us taking us here, there, everywhere didn't always you know, bring up, like, hold us back. It didn't hold us back from doing what we wanted. So it was a balance, I would say. But yeah, not everyone has that. So I was quite lucky in that sense.
Okay. Did either of you have kind of that mentality growing up with your parents, with that kind of, because you're Black, you'll have to work 10 times harder than everyone else? Because I definitely did.
Definitely. It was kind of like, yeah, okay, these are the acceptable fields that you can go into, and you have to work, you know, 20 times harder than everybody else to even get to the same baseline. So just make sure that, you know, no coming home and running around the beach, no anything. You're coming home, you're going in your bedroom, you're studying until we tell you to stop. That's how that went. Yeah, it was I think that it still continues today. I mean, there were certain things that we were told was just not for us, and the arts was definitely one of them. You were allowed to be a doctor, a lawyer, a business person, as a woman, a nurse. And yeah, the arts was not even discussed. It was like, no, that's not for you. That's for rich white people. And you have to work. Just know that you have to, even to get to the same level, you have got to work 10 to 20 times harder to be seen.
Mm.
Right. So kind of coming off from this, I went to an all-girls school growing up, and kind of within that, we were very much told, like, oh, as women, we will be put down, you know, we'll have the glass ceiling that we have to break through. So we have to, you know, we can achieve anything we want, but we will have to work for it. But within that school, I was pretty much the only person of color. I think, you know, there were a handful of us, but it was very much, you know, we could count them on one hand, certainly. So there was never any kind of discussions about race and what the kind of intersection of race and gender kind of come together. So obviously that kind of comes into kind of white feminism, which is kind of spoken about a lot whenever we talk about Black women. I suppose the question is kind of, is there anything wrong with white feminism? Do you guys think that it's misplaced, or that is there anything we can do to kind of, I'm not really wording this very well, but I suppose the first question is, what do you guys think about white feminism as it is?
I guess like now it's kind of seen as like the whole Karen thing or whatever, or generally just like kind of like quite self-involved and non-intersectional, I suppose. Like I felt like my first beef with it was, I don't know if anyone remembers, a couple of years ago, but it was a journalist from The Gender magazine who I'm sure probably still writes for The Guardian, and had this article about how we shouldn't use the term intersectionality because it's too complicated, and like a woman down the hairdressers wouldn't know what it means. And that was obviously really tone deaf, considering that the term, or even like the theory, comes from working class Black women in the States, and then obviously Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term. It's just some stupidness. So I kind of see, like, to me, that is like the epitome of white feminism, like the idea that a theory that has come from outside of their spectrum could be wholly applicable. And then I do think later on, white feminism kind of took the term of intersectionality and just kind of not sanitized it, but kind of has almost like depoliticized it in a way. It's almost like they use it as like a cherry picking of like different oppressions, as opposed to really focusing on like how oppression intersects. I don't know, yeah, perhaps I haven't explained that quite clearly, but like it's not like a sum game. It's not like, oh, I'm Black and a woman, but my bandmate is Black and a woman and a lesbian, so like she has more like oppression. It needs to be like it. I think for me, like, white feminism doesn't feel like a global feminism, whereas I think Black feminism tends to actually consider things like class more specifically, and also the fact that like not everything is Western centric, and yeah, have more of a global politic, which I think is really important.
I was watching what was it? I think it's a program called Miss America, and it's like in the 70s, and they have it's actually a good watch if you want to know about like feminism, like the white feminism, and it's, you can see the difference, because there are some like Black female characters in there, and they're working for the magazine or something, and like they're bringing up issues which are white issues. They're not bringing up issues, they're not thinking beyond themselves. And that's the issue with like white feminism. And obviously, you know, feminism in itself, it's breaking down like a barrier, and they're thinking, oh, well, we're doing the work, like, you know, we're doing the hard work as it is, and now we have to consider someone else's feelings and what they might need, and that's the thing. It is important that we do think about everyone involved, and if you're going to bring yourself up, you've got to bring the others up with you, because that's how we're going to break down barriers. You can't just be thinking about yourself, and that's the issue with white feminism. They don't consider people's cultures and their background and what issues that they might have to go through. And it's like we're slowly learning that there's so many issues that are affecting other women in different countries that white feminism doesn't include. We're just getting started, to be honest. Yeah, and so yeah, that's really like the main issue with like white feminism, I feel.
Yeah, I agree with both Estelle and Bev. For me, white feminism is just very problematic because they have kind of ignored the Black women who got them to that point. you know, the Black women who walked with them, who did all these things, and yet when it came to taking the rewards, it was like, no, it was just us, we did it ourselves. And when you look at history, that's clearly not the case. So I agree that it's very much about they're not really interested in seeing it from anybody else's point of view. It's very much of, okay, well, these are our issues and we're fighting for these issues. And I think that it has to be, I personally refuse to be called a feminist, because every time that I do, I just think that I'm insulting the Black women that actually helped them fight for it and then just basically got dropped to the side when they got whatever they wanted. So no.
I think before we just move on to the next question, I'll just plug Menti again. So if you do want to ask any questions, just go to menti.com and type in 8021613 and you'll be able to ask us some questions. So it's 8021613. Right. Okay. Every single discussion that I've ever had about being a Black woman kind of talks about Diana Abbott in some way. I think obviously she's for anyone who doesn't know who Diana Abbott is, she is the UK's first Black female member of Parliament. She was elected in the 80s, I believe, and I believe it came out last year, maybe the year before, that out of all the hate and abuse that is received by female MPs, Diana Abbott receives over half of it. And you know, she's spoken very openly about the racist and sexist abuse that she will receive daily, not just every now and then, daily. I believe, like, she says that pretty much what happens is people who work for her just kind of gather up everything that they get and they just take it to the police every single day. So it's a huge problem. And I think this kind of feeds into the idea of misogynoir. So that's misogyny that is specifically towards Black women. So I think the question here is, thinking about obviously the likes of Diana Abbott, does the UK have a problem with misogyny in general, but particularly misogynoir?
Yeah. Like, I just think definitely, like, it's ridiculous. Like, even, you know, I'm no royalist or anything, but like, they couldn't even handle Meghan Markle. Like, literally, like, she got driven out the country, and this country loves the royal family. But like, the idea of like a Black woman, an American Black woman, African American woman marrying into the royal family was too much for this country.
I mean, after all, how dare she?
Yeah. It's just like every kind of stereotype, like, who's this uppity actress not worthy of the world? Like ridiculous. Obviously the treatment of Diana Abbott, like, how many people are still bringing up that she got a figure wrong once when the country's run by a literal idiot? Like, it's ridiculous. Like, yeah, it's just absurd. And I think it just feels so palpable. Like, you can just tell, and like the erasure of Black women in this country, like, it might not seem a particular big deal, but obviously you had the thing where Stormzy headlined Glastonbury, and I think he at first thought it was like, oh, first Black person to headline Glastonbury, and did correct later when it's like, no, it was actually Skin from Skunk Anansie, like, or Skunk Anansie in general, were the first bands of Black members to headline Glastonbury, things like that. Just Black women constantly being forgotten. Polystyrene, another example of a Black woman who's not necessarily always remembered for being a Black woman. Like, Yeah, like, I don't know what's going on in this country, but like they cannot deal with, like, I think powerful or intelligent, outspoken Black women.
Cool. I think that
She said it all.
yeah, I think that was very well said.
Like racist, man. Racist.
I suppose the obvious next question is, well, is there anything we can do about it other than, you know, major radical reform of everything about this country?
I mean, I slightly worry because I was speaking to a professor at a university, and this white person said to me, I don't know why you're still here, because it's never going to change. So, I mean, when you're getting a statement like that from someone who is in the education system, has power, you kind of have to wonder, you know, can we actually change it? I am gonna hope that we can, because it can't possibly continue this way. But yet you see people like, is it Piers Morgan, for instance, verbally taking shots at Meghan Markle pretty much every day. Nobody stops him. Nobody does anything. You know, you're seeing here in the arts, you're seeing trying to even right now, for instance, the council is talking lots of talk about decolonialize this, decolonialize that. But when you actually go and you try to have a conversation with them, instead, what you get is a lot of speak, and they tell you about the marble in the city chambers, you know. So I think that, or they go the completely opposite direction and they do this exotic, erotic BS where it's like, oh, you're so exotic, or you're so pretty. No, I have a brain, you know. So I don't, the jury for me is still out on it. I mean, we all live here, and I would like to think that somewhere along the line, we can shake things up enough that, or there are enough of us sitting on enough boards, sitting on enough, you know, in office, that we can maybe change something. But right now, for me, the jury is still kind of out, because we're in 2020. If you look at the likes of the Windrush generation coming over in 1940, 1950s, and the way that these people who gave up what was essentially their home for 30, 40 years are now being treated by this government. When you look at things like that, I kind of think, well, you know, is there a shot for us to actually get to the point where we can actually change things? Because it seems that, you know, for every for every one step we take forward, we end up taking two back. And so you're constantly feeling that if you're on a running mill, hoping that you can eventually just hit the top bar. And it can sometimes just be quite overwhelming and slightly depressing.
I think from that, I think a good question to ask is, obviously this year's been kind of tough for everyone, but with everything that's happened with Black Lives Matter, with the death of George Floyd and the death of Breonna Taylor, you know, I think, yes, a lot of people have had their eyes opened to racism worldwide, but I think it is still telling that, you know, there was so much focus on George Floyd, but not that much national focus and international focus on Breonna Taylor. Now, you know, again, yeah, it's been a very tough year for everyone, and I suppose you know, for Black people in general, and for Black women in particular, there is this expectation to be strong and to keep on fighting and blah blah blah. So I suppose the question is, have you been resilient, and how have you been resilient?
I feel like people definitely just need to take breaks, I think, from, or for me personally, from like the kind of continual stream of just awful news that we have access to 24/7 now. Like, I mean, I've had a few days not active on Twitter that much, and it's been quite nice. It's because it's like I can't just read awful stuff all day, every day. And I think, I don't know about being resilient. For me, it was quite, yeah, I guess just like maybe we definitely need to deal with even just like the trauma of the George Floyd situation. Like, for me, like the fact that his death was just on video on Twitter is incredibly disturbing, and the fact that a lot of people felt comfortable to share the moment that a man like literally died was very disturbing to me, on top of the manner of how it happened and just how awful the entire thing was. And I think similarly with Breonna Taylor as well, like the idea that someone can, yeah, be murdered by the police in their homes and people perhaps not pay for it, or, you know, like not see justice done, and have her name dragged through the mud and be accused of all kinds of things, and she's just minding her business in her own house, is I think it's, I don't know if even that psychological impact has been kind of considered and dealt with. So yeah, I do think maybe Black women in particular should actually be taking those times out and using like self-care in its initial political meaning, which was looking after yourself so that you can come back and still have the energy to do the work and support your community and stuff. Because I think it would just be so easy to burn out this year, having just witnessed and been through so much, and living through a pandemic that's disproportionately affecting our communities as well. I think just like taking care and yeah, remembering to take care of yourself and your loved ones is really important as well, like as well as being out there protesting and things like that.
I think that it's definitely important to take time out. The one thing that I took hope from was the fact that we now live in a world where everybody has a phone with a camera. Everybody can, you know, before these atrocities were going on, and it was all swept under the rug, and they were getting away with even more. And so what I took from all the social media was, okay, well, this was horrific, but they can't hide it anymore, because somebody's going to come along and they're going to have a camera and they're going to shoot it, and it's going to be seen by the world, and the world are actually going to see how we are actually treated. Because there are a lot of people who think that slavery ended and every person who's Black can suddenly have a wonderful life and they can do whatever. And I think that that was the jarring evidence that no, this is actually what we go through every single day on a daily basis for our lives. I also think that when you take time off, for me especially, I turned to exercise. So all of the anger and the bitterness and the unhappiness that I felt, I went and boxed the hell out of a bag. Like, I just put, you know, all these random faces on the bag, and then I went crazy. And that gets that frustration out, and you're thinking that, well, you know, and I remember saying to someone, right, if I'm crying, if I'm screaming, just fuck off and let me be for 10 minutes. And then you just get it out that way, because I think that it's, especially because the pandemic as well is affecting us in such a way, and nobody seems to be particularly bothered, to then have these atrocities, it's like atrocity on top of atrocity. And you have to figure out a way of not burning out, of getting it, this vileness out of your system, so that you can then be you, and you can help people if you need to. Because I think that if you keep it in and you go like, you know, I can deal with this, it starts to eat away at you, and you start to think all thoughts are random thoughts. So I think that on one hand, it's important not necessarily to see these atrocities, but to know that they're no longer being committed in the dark. And on the other hand, I think that you do need to maybe sometimes just turn everything off and go beat the living crap out of something.
That's some good advice.
Yeah. Exercise is definitely a great way to get like that anger and release out. But yeah, obviously we were in lockdown when all you know, the George Floyd stuff happened. So it was like, what do we do? And like you said, Kat, it was like a double, like like we're the ones facing, you know, suffering from the virus the most, and then on top of it, this you know, these things are happening as well. And I think what helped me was actually going out on the march, because until then it was like you were just alone in your house, and it was being around, you know, people who look like you and feeling that you're kind of in this fight together. That was really, really helpful. So try and surround yourself with people who literally understand and get it. You know what I mean? Because sometimes it can be difficult when this was all carrying out on social media, and you can see people posting it, but when you're face to face with like people who totally understand you and you can have those conversations with them, that's really, really important, I think. And that helped me a lot, massively. Yeah, that's good.
I think, yeah, it's been, I mean, yeah, I think for me it was kind of very similar. I felt very like, I felt quite useless, I suppose is the best way to put it, because I was shielding, and with, you know, I'd see, oh, there's this protest in London, and I'd know, well, I can't go to it because I have to stay at home. And, you know, normally in a situation like this, I'd be the first one out on the march. So I felt like I wasn't doing anything. So that was quite tough for me. But yeah. Okay, so we have some questions from our audience. So the comments about white feminism were interesting, particularly that it represents as a homogenous groupthink. What could we do to find some common ground to work together?
My initial thought would be to have them acknowledge that they didn't come to this platform themselves, that there were Black and brown women who helped them to get to this place. Because I think that unless they can acknowledge that and kind of broaden their thinking, that realistically there's no common ground. Because if I'm coming from a place where I'm representing marginalized communities, and I'm trying to have a discussion with someone whose biggest issue is, you know, what car do I buy? It's two completely very different things. And so, you know, you have that, I think that the acknowledgement that women of color helped them march and helped them actually get to this particular point in time would be important. And I also think that them having a broader understanding that the world does not just revolve around their issues. There are much broader issues out in the world that need to be seriously dealt with. That would then give a common ground, because I don't think at the moment there's common ground. I think that you can try to have conversations with people, but yeah, at the moment for me, I don't think that there's common ground. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think I agree in a sense, like it kind of, my first thought was, I guess there needs to be more listening, I think. And yeah, kind of echoing what you said, like acknowledgement of the actual lives of people of color, and yeah, understanding how, like things like misogynoir, like the fact that our experience of as women can't really be separated from our racialized experience. And yeah, I think just kind of understanding that those separate perspectives need to be included in feminism and critiques and so on. And yeah, I still think class as well still needs to play a big role. I think especially in a country like ours where class dynamics play out in pretty much every sphere, they're so like prominent here. And yeah, just understanding how they can all affect each other, like race, class, sexuality, etc., etc. Yeah, I just think that for me, there needs to be more space for that within like kind of white feminism TM kind of thing.
And just to like add to that, it's feminism, you're trying to teach kind of men, cis men in particular, that like you're trying to explain to them like what it is that like what doors are getting shut in our faces, sort of thing. So we're trying, if white feminism is trying to teach treat the patriarchal and misogyny like what it is that is stopping us from growing. They, white feminists should be open into learning as well when other, they should be open into like learning themselves when someone turns around and says, well, actually, you're actually blocking me from doing what I need to do as well. So from that, hopefully people are learning constantly. Like that's the main thing, that people are learning constantly about what needs to be rejigged to suit and include everyone into getting a piece of the pie, basically. So
I suppose a good question to kind of come from that is for allies, what can they do to help, I suppose, is just the best question. What can they do in general to show that they are true allies? What would you suggest?
To talk to their own like white feminist friends and family members. Like we keep saying, we're tired of always having to do the work. It's not for us to explain to them, it's for them to explain to their other family members and friends who may have like fucked up ideas of blackness or black women in general. So whenever they hear anything, or they need to cut them off and say like, no, that's not correct, this isn't how you should be talking, or your views should not be like like that. So that's what they need to be doing, allies.
Yeah, I agree. I
Yeah.
think that they also need to listen themselves and not be quick to try to put a plaster on the situation. So if as an ally, you're saying to me, so, you know, explain to me why this, and then I'm explaining it to you, and you're going like, but oh, no, because you're busy, you're so busy defending yourself, you're not actually hearing what I'm saying. I think that's very important. They kind of need to, yeah, definitely listen and stop being so defensive. And because I think that until that happens, you know, we're just going to keep doing the same circle.
Anything to add?
I kind of feel like you both said made really great points, but like, yeah, I guess just, I mean, I like some of the things, like, for example, people with bigger platforms handing them over to people of color, kind of removing themselves, and yeah, actually like sharing, yeah, just giving people like access to wider audiences, if like that can be helpful. Yeah, because it just felt like, you know, it's all well and good that it felt like a lot of people suddenly realized like racism existed this summer, and it's like, I feel like we've been talking about it the whole time, so like, where were you? So yeah, just, I guess like, yeah, allies can kind of educate themselves, which I think you kind of mentioned already, Bev, but like, yeah, educate themselves and educate their own as well is a big part of it. Yeah, just do the reading. Never hurts to do the reading, I think.
Well, thank you guys so much for having a wee discussion. And thank you all watching this. I hope this has been informative. And so yeah, thank you to Kat, Estella, and Bev for being good chat. Right. Thank you, everyone, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.